and welcome to the Watchman. Well, there's so much going on in the Middle East and with the global jihad right now that I wanted to start out this week by getting you up to speed on breaking developments. First off, the United States is now bombing ISIS and Al-Qaeda targets in Syria. Finally. Now, the Europeans are slowly getting on board and pledging to help, and we've got the support of 5 Arab nations: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Jordan. Now, how long and to what extent those Muslim nations help remains to be seen. And let's not get all giddy that we have Arab support, huh? Normally, the likes of Saudi Arabia and Qatar, both of which have sponsored terrorist groups, wouldn't bat an eye at seeing Christians, Yazidis, Kurds, and Shiite Muslims slaughtered. The only reason they're on board here is because they fear they will be the next dominoes to fall in the expanding ISIS caliphate. Survival mode. By the way, do we still need ground forces to crush ISIS? Absolutely. But right now, President Obama won't even consider putting boots on the ground in Iraq or Syria, even though several top military men have said we cannot defeat ISIS through airstrikes alone. And folks, make no mistake, if we don't crush ISIS decisively, they will hit us here. The threat of attacks on American soil is imminent. That's one reason why I'm currently writing a book about the ISIS threat. More on that later in the show. But first, another update about a Muslim convert named Alton Nolan, who was fired from his job at a food processing plant in Moore, Oklahoma, and returned to the plant and beheaded one of his female co-workers, nearly stabbing another woman to death in the process. Thankfully, the killer was shot and wounded before he could do any more damage. His Facebook page was covered in nasty anti-American, pro-jihad, pro-Al-Qaeda rhetoric, along with pictures of Nolan worshiping at various area mosques. He reportedly had tried to convert co-workers to Islam, and witnesses said he shouted Islamic slogans as he was carrying out his murderous beheading, which came, by the way, just a few days after ISIS released an audio tape calling on American Muslims to carry out self-starter, lone wolf-type attacks. Despite all of this, the beheading of a middle-aged Oklahoma woman by a radicalized Muslim convert is being called workplace violence by authorities. Now, if you remember, the Fort Hood attack got the same designation from the Obama administration. Folks, how can we defeat the enemy if we can't even name it? Speaking of defeating the enemy, update number 3 brings us to Anjem Choudary. Now, I've interviewed Choudary several times, most recently via Skype. He's Great Britain's most notorious radical Islamist and an open supporter of ISIS. Some of his followers have even traveled to Syria to join the Islamic State. Well, Choudary was arrested recently by British authorities under suspicion that he was encouraging terrorism. Imagine that. He was released on bail, but the question remains, does Anjem Choudary encourage terrorism? I'll let you be the judge. Take a look at this 2012 profile I produced on the man some say is Great Britain's most hated. Anjem Choudary has been called the face of radical Islam in Great Britain. He holds frequent rallies calling for Islamic Sharia law to be imposed on that country. CBN News first interviewed him in 2010, right after the British government banned his group Sharia for UK. On a recent visit to London, we found the ban has failed to stop Choudary from spreading his message that Islam will soon dominate Britain and the world.
So you believe America, Great Britain, all of Europe will be Islamic states living under Sharia eventually?
Inevitably. I'm convinced. I'm 100% certain that the Sharia will be implemented in America and in Britain one day. The question is when and how it will come to fruition.
And he's unapologetic about what a society ruled by Sharia would mean.
If people are afraid of having their hands cut, don't steal. If you don't want to be stoned to death, don't commit adultery. I mean, it seems to me that people want all of the vices and they want to get away with it as well. But, it doesn't work like that.
Chowdary's vision is catching on among some Western Muslims. Sharia for UK has spawned at least two offshoots, Sharia for Holland and Sharia for Belgium. There's also Sharia for America, based in New York City, which Choudary says is active on U.S. soil.
Tell us more about Sharia for America and what they're all about.
We had the Sharia for America project where we put down what we consider to be an alternative to liberal democracy and freedom and the kind of life that people lead in America.
Sharia for America is not alone. Its pro-Sharia, pro-caliphate message has been echoed in recent years by a Chicago area group called Hizb ut-Tahrir America.
Ultimately, the Americans will be defeated. They're going to be defeated back home, and they will be defeated militarily, and they will not get the resources. They will go from the depression, and the recession into, a complete, if you like, downfall.
Chowdary's public support for jihad against British troops keeps his group on the radar of the country's intelligence services. Some of his followers have been arrested on terrorism charges, but Choudary claims his group rejects violence for now.
Britain is Darul Harb because they are, anathema to God's law. They're not implementing it. They're violating His sanctity, and therefore this is war against Allah and His Messenger. But we are not allowed to actually fight them here at the current time. So we are, propagating Islam.
At the current time.
At the current time,
Will there be a time?
Well, Eric, we are not like the Christians. If you hit me on the left cheek, I'm not going to give you my right cheek. I'm going to defend myself. So at the moment, we're propagating Islam peacefully. But if they attack us, we have a right to defend ourselves.
What if they don't attack, but say you get numbers, you get strength, say Muslims became a majority in Great Britain? Then would there be a cause for offensive jihad?
If we have enough authority and we have enough power, we are obliged as Muslims to take the authority away from the people who have it and implement the Sharia.
In the meantime, he's encouraged by the Islamist regimes coming to power as a result of the so-called Arab Spring, and takes it as a sign that his goal of a global caliphate is inevitable. Now that you have an idea of what Anjem Choudary is all about, here's a clip from my most recent interview with him where he talks about his open support for the ISIS caliphate. Take a look. You have been accused in the British media of recruiting for ISIS, and that some of your followers have actually gone to Syria to join with this group. How do you respond to that?
Well, nobody's actually gone to date to Syria or Iraq, having informed me beforehand. I mean, I've discovered that there are some people there, and by all accounts, the people who are there, who I know, are just living there as citizens. They've decided that they want to live under the Sharia. They want to experience the Islamic State. They want to bring up their children according to Islam. Before the 29th of June, people were going there for humanitarian reasons. Obviously, people were going to fight against Bashar al-Assad and the Nusayris and the Iraqi regime, who by all accounts have been raping and pillaging and been very brutal. But after the 29th of June, after the establishment of the Khilafah, I think you find now that the people are flocking there because they want to live under the Sharia. Remember, you have now a state there. There are millions of people living there, Christians, Jews, Muslims, even Yazidis, who are living there. Their basic needs are being protected. The basic needs are being provided. Their security is there. So I think there's different reasons why people are going there. Not everybody is going there, and learning how to fight and then wanting to return, to the West, which is what people like Cameron and Obama would have you believe.
Yeah. So you would encourage Muslims to go to the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq?
I think that the Muslims should worship Allah wherever they are in the world, and I'm here in Britain. I worship Allah as best as I can here. If I was in America, I'd do the same. I don't believe that anybody should be restricted from traveling anywhere in the world. So if they want to go, that's their choice. I'm not buying plane tickets for them. Nobody's asking me if they want to go abroad. The problem that you have in the West is that, you cannot decide who's a freedom fighter and who's a terrorist. Sheikh Osama bin Laden was a freedom fighter. People were loving him in the West. And then when he fought against the Americans, he's a terrorist. So your definition of terrorism changes depending on which way the wind's blowing. So it's not the same. We have divine law. Our own actions are guided by the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They don't change every day depending on what the government says.
So
today in Britain, if you want to travel abroad to Syria, you'll be arrested at the airport. Your passport will be taken. You'll be citizenless. You'll be treated as a terrorist. You're guilty until proven otherwise. That would never happen to a white Englishman called John or Bob. It only happens to Muhammad and Abdul Rahman.
Well, what about Richard Dart, who is a follower of yours, a white Englishman who converted to Islam and was convicted on terror charges?
Well, I wouldn't read too much into that, Eric. Now Nowadays, if you don't plead guilty, you're going to be found guilty anyway by a biased jury. The courts are biased, the police are biased, the Crown Prosecution Service is biased. He's going to face 40 or 50 years in prison, because, there's no way of him being found innocent, even though I believe he's innocent. I don't believe he did anything wrong at all. But the problem is that, you have plea bargaining nowadays, and there's absolutely no chance of getting a fair trial and being found innocent. People are given choice between 5 or 10 years in prison or 30 or 40 years in prison. Really, they're choosing the lower one. That doesn't mean that they're guilty.
Anjem, to listen to you, it sounds like you believe Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri, the Islamic State, al-Baghdadi, people like Richard Dart have been convicted on terrorism charges. Pretty compelling evidence in my view. It seems like you believe these entities, these individuals, these organizations have done nothing wrong, and they are Islamically mandated to do what they're doing.
Up next, President Obama says the Islamic State is not Islamic. Some former Muslims beg to differ. That's coming up after the break. And welcome back. When President Obama announced his plan to take on ISIS, he made it a point to declare that the Islamic State is not Islamic. Now, former Muslims are stepping up and speaking out. They say the president has it all wrong. Our Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell has that report.
In both his primetime speech to the nation and his UN speech to the world, President Obama defined Islam and the Islamic State as he sees them.
At the same time, we have reaffirmed again and again that the United States is not and never will be at war with Islam. Islam teaches peace.
ISIL is not Islamic. No religion condones the killing of innocents, and the vast majority of ISIL's victims have been Muslim.
It may not be the Islam President Obama wants, but some former Muslims say the religion and practices embraced by the Islamic State come straight from the Quran.
They are following Islam's Prophet Muhammad in every detail.
Brother Rashid is a former Muslim who grew up in Morocco. He hosts the television show Daring Question and gave this response to President Obama's claim.
I can tell you with confidence that ISIL speaks for Islam. Allow me to correct you, Mr. President. ISIL is a Muslim organization. Its name stands for Islamic State. So even the name suggests that it is an Islamic movement.
He quoted chapter and verse from the Quran.
You think that ISIL does not speak for Islam because they beheaded an American and they killed those whom they consider infidels. In fact, beheading is commanded in the Quran, in Surah 47, the 4th verse. It says, when you meet the unbelievers in fight, smite at their necks.
So this idea that what ISIS is doing is un-Islamic is not true at all. It's pure Islamic.
And former Muslim Noni Darwish says it all leads to the ultimate goal stated in the Quran.
The goals of the Islamic State is to empower itself to control the whole of the Middle East and expand to achieve the goals of Islam, of converting the whole world into one Islamic State, forcing Islam on the rest of the world.
Rashid adds that just because these radicals kill other Muslims, it does not make them un-Islamic.
You might ask, then why does ISIL kill other Muslims? The answer is that they consider them infidels, not Muslims.
Both Rashid and Darwish warn that political correctness masks the true danger of ISIL and puts the whole world at risk.
People have to wake up because the essence of our Judeo-Christian values and our way of life is at stake.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Coming up, how did Israel become the bad guy and its enemies the good guys in the eyes of the world? Find out after the break. Welcome back. The UN continues to investigate and condemn Israel for defending itself against Hamas terrorist attacks. And anti-Semitism is so bad in Germany that Chancellor Angela Merkel recently led a rally to gather support for Israel in Berlin. So how did Israel, a democratic nation and Western ally, become the bad guy in the eyes of the world? My CBN News colleague John Wagi recently interviewed author Joshua Moravchik about that very subject. Moravchik's new book is called Making David into Goliath: How the World Turned Against Israel.
With us now from Washington is Joshua Moravchik. He's a scholar on the Middle East and an author of a new book called Making David into Goliath: How the World Turned Against Israel. Dr. Moravchik, thanks for being with us. There was a recent incident in Washington where Texas Senator Ted Cruz was booed off the stage for his support of Israel. You wrote that that incident might have a silver lining. Tell us about that.
Well, I think it reflected two things. When supporters of Israel saw this, the senator being booed for saying some pro-Israel remarks, they were dismayed. And I think they were dismayed to learn that some Middle Eastern Christians, who Israel looks upon as their natural allies, still nonetheless have the feelings of their fellow Arabs that are not friendly to Israel. Some do, others don't. But some of them raised their voices against Senator Cruz, which is what caused this incident. But I think what it symbolized in a bigger sense is how much the conservative world, the Republican world, has become staunchly pro-Israel. And we have this amazing poll that came out from the Pew organization, which said they found the largest partisan gap in terms of attitudes towards Israel that has ever been recorded in polling. And that gap showed that Republicans were more likely to be friendly toward Israel by about a difference of 30 percentage points, which is an awful lot, than were Democrats.
You have talked in your book about the whole idea of the UN investigations and the whole change in the world since 1967 when Israel won the Six-Day War and public opinion worldwide turned against Israel. The UN has been a centerpiece of that, and several senators, both Republican and Democrat, now want to investigate the UN for its connection to Hamas terrorists in Gaza. Could Congress wield some clout since the U.S. provides almost a quarter of the UN budget?
Well, it can, and I think it should. You know, if you go back some years, when Senator Jesse Helms of North Carolina, who was known as a staunch conservative, was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, he began to put a hold on U.S. funding for the UN and for different UN agencies. And of course, it made a lot of people in our own diplomatic world very uncomfortable because the other countries were angry at us for not paying up our UN dues. But even though it made a lot of people uncomfortable, at the end, the effect was we did have some marginal improvement in the UN. We did have some reform of the UN. The UN body called UNESCO, the scientific and cultural organization of the UN, which had gone the furthest off the deep end, not only anti-Israel, but anti-American, anti-Western, pro-revolutionary, really wild stuff. We had completely cut off our money for UNESCO, and then, lo and behold, the UN reformed UNESCO and came around knocking at every door, as both senators and congressmen here and even people involved in shaping public opinion. They came to knock on my door, and I'm just a guy who scribbles about this stuff, to say, look, we've changed UNESCO. We've moved to the center. We're not radical anymore. Please advocate putting back U.S. money. So I think it is a way. The UN is never going to be a very fair organization, but if we want to make it better, we can use the power of the purse to put some pressure.
We just have a short time left. Could you tell me whether you think these public beheadings and the whole threat of ISIS might cause the Western world to wake up a bit about what the kind of threat they're facing?
Well, these ugly, astonishingly horrible events have, in fact, spurred even President Obama to want to do something. But the problem is that ISIS is only the tip of the iceberg. And are we going to just do some symbolic things aiming back at them? or are we going to go all out against them? And also understand that there's this whole thing of Islamic radicalism that is very violent. Maybe some are more violent than the other, but that's sort of that's splitting hairs. They're all violent, and they're all very, very hostile, both to Israel, of course, to the Middle East, but to the West, to Christians, to everything we believe in. And we can't just be standing around because they might be out there now, but as we saw on 9/11, they will be trying their darndest to come get us if we just let that metastasize.
Well, Dr. Moravchik, thank you very much. We appreciate you being with us.
Up next, some final thoughts and details on my upcoming book about ISIS. Stick around. Welcome back. You know, writing a book is no easy task. I've written 2 in the past 3 years alone, The Terrorist Next Door and The Brotherhood, both available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold. They were very hard work. I've got 2 little ones at home and a full-time job here at CBN, in addition to speaking around the country and popping up on Fox News, etc. But I felt that both of those books had to be written as educational tools for the American people for such a time as this. I feel the same way about my latest book. It's going to be about ISIS. Now, we don't have a name for it yet, but I can promise you that this book will rip the lid off of what ISIS and radical Islamists are doing right here on American soil in your backyard. It will shock you. Look for it in March or April of 2015. It's my 3rd book with Regnery Publishing, and I believe it will be the most important one to date. I'll have more details and specifics in the weeks and months to come, but right now I just wanted to let you know that I'm plugging away on this book and trying to live up to the title of this show, to be a watchman on the wall for our nation and for Israel. Thanks for joining us, and until next week, God bless you, and remember, never hold your peace.